So happy to have you here for our session talking about Know Your Worth, how to negotiate your salary. We have an exciting lineup. We have 2 guest speakers here with us. Very, very, very happy to have them. How this will work, I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to start our discussion on this topic. And if you have questions as we go along, if you could post your questions into the chat. We expect that our discussion will go on for about maybe 35, 40 minutes, and then at the end, our panelists will take your questions. How does that sound? Good. Let me pull up my chat. So I have my chat. All right. So we have 2 panelists. Our first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Professor Denis Leclerc. He is a professor at the Thunderbird School of Global Management. He's been teaching there for many, many, many years. He's originally from France. He has his PhD from Arizona State University, specializing in intercultural communication, competence, and global negotiation. He does a lot of consulting, helping companies on this topic. Really big companies such as American Express, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, ExxonMobil, we're very, very, very happy to have him here with us today. We also have David Darkwa giving us the on-continent perspective. He works for Mercy Corps, and he works in finance and the refugee program. He recently built a team for his project, so he has some real hands-on experience about what it's like for you all who are applying for jobs and looking for jobs. So we're very, very happy to have him here. He's also an entrepreneur, which is good because so many of you all are also very entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial in your approach. So welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. So happy to have you here. For our first question, we wanted to get both of your perspective on this of what are some common trends that you're seeing in the industry? What are some common trends where you're seeing of people in the job market? And I think we'll start with Denis and then we'll go to David.
Well, thank you. First of all, truly appreciate the invitation. I'm very happy to be talking to everybody. So this is an interesting part about the trends, because if we had that conversation a few years ago, there would be a lot of different kind of conversation in terms of the trends. I think right now, and I'm going to talk more about the US, and then David maybe can take it for the continent, but I know that what's happening here in Europe and in the US is a lot of technology-based resume pulling, and also right now, so the resume has to be uploaded to a software. So that's why we'll talk later on about like keywords you want to choose is very important. And the other part is also the fact that I have seen that, especially with my students, companies that maybe 6 months ago were offering absolutely amazing salaries and perks. And I think the market here, the job market in the US is starting to shrink a little bit, or companies are realizing that, you know, maybe they should not offer these pretty amazing salaries. And also the big trend in the US, especially in the US right now, is people want to work remotely. And I think that has been exponential with COVID. I have students who get salaries and like, I don't want to go to the office. So, you know, I just want to stay at home. So that would be kind of the big trends. The fact that the employees are looking for very high level of flexibility in terms of working conditions.
Thank you so much. Really interesting. Very interesting. David, what are your insights, especially from the on-continent perspective? What are some trends that you've been seeing?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you confirm if I'm loud and clear? Just great. All right. Yes. So it's been, I'd say, two strong trends come to mind. I think one of it Dennis touched on very slightly, which has to do with a lot of flexible time and remote work. This has really surged, right, after COVID, after the 2020 pandemic, and you have a lot more employers who are now accommodating flexible time, and some of them actually expect their recruits, so employees, to be able to work remotely, to be able to work with different digital systems. And so that expectation is there, and you want to make sure that you keep that at the forefront of your mind when you are going into any job hunt. The second one, I'd say, largely has to do with the emergence of the gig economy. So I'll say 10 years back, 5 years back, you had a lot of the predominant work style or model was this employer-employee based arrangements where you would have typical benefits and a whole comprehensive package that you negotiate with your employer. Increasingly, this is really across both West and Eastern Africa, from north to the south. You have a lot more employers now switching to contract-based employment, and so that requires a different mindset when it comes to negotiation. In terms of, well, you may not have some of these perks or benefits available. You may have to sort of deftly balance that level of effort and that fee, or your consultant fee or your contract fee, or whatever you call it. And it's important to know how to make some useful compromises as well, and still make sure that you come out on top, and that is a win-win. So these are the two big ones that I'd say are sort of, yeah, trending. I think, Liz, you might be on mute.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. And let me just add, for our people that are attending, feel free to post questions in chat. We'll be monitoring that, so we can make sure this is interactive and make sure that your questions and concerns get addressed. The second question that we would like to for you to address are, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see people do? And we're going to start with David on this one.
Sure. Well, I think when it comes to salary negotiations, it's a tricky topic and lots of pitfalls, but there are some mistakes that sort of really jump out. In my experience, I've found that really not a mistake that most tend to make is not linking the compensation or the salary to their value. And so a lot of the times you find people either pleading or almost sometimes begging or citing personal circumstances, and hoping that the employer would be sensitive to that. What I'd say really is that the job search really is a sales and marketing endeavor, and really you are the product, you are the salesperson, and your employer is a customer. And so the reason why your employer is hiring is because he believes you have value that you're going to contribute. And so a lot of conversations should always be tied to your value. And so overlooking that is a big oversight. And it's important to make sure that no matter how the conversation evolves, you always make sure that you turn it, sort of direct it to your value. You need to establish your value in the mind of the employer, and then make sure that all the conversations, all the discussions around that. The other thing I'd also point out to is that during salary negotiations, from the start, you tend to have a lot of people focusing on the now and forgetting the future. So you find people sort of sometimes playing hardball or fixating on a specific amount that they'll receive now and not making the relevant compromises. They focus, a lot of attention is usually focused on how much can I get now. It's important to know that while you may want to make sure that you sort of make sure it's a fair endeavor, you need to build in some sort of performance-based arrangement right from the start. It makes salary negotiations or negotiating a raise much later, much easier. Because if you're able to lock in certain key deliverables or milestones or expectations, right from the start, then it becomes easier a year down the line, 2 years down the line, when you want to have that very difficult conversation of asking for a raise. And so you may need to be able to see your position sometimes and put in something that you would structure an arrangement that you benefit from in the long term, in the future. So those are two big ones.
Thank you so much. If before jumping into Denis, if we can share a question from the chat that relates to the trend that you observed. We have a question from our dear Andrew Akuaku. He wants to know, why do you think employers are now interested in contract-based employment?
I think yours is as good as mine. I think the burden, the compensation burden is, or the package is much less for the employer because they tend to, payment of, you typically, many times people look at salary from the lens of my basic salary, my base, right? But for the employer, there are a whole lot of benefits that come attached to this, and sometimes taxes, and you may have even a visa or tuition investments and all of that. And so if they can strip off all those benefits and then just make this strictly sort of, on a contract, that means that we are compensating you for your time and you are not eligible for any benefits. So that really is a predominant,
Yeah, very true. All right, Denis.
Thank you. If you don't mind me adding to what David was saying and the questions, because interestingly enough, for the employers is also the flexibility of the workforce. So they don't feel like, when the business is slowing down, they don't have to pay you. So especially if you look at the gig economy, if no customers are buying, I'm not paying you to just sit around waiting to, and you're still being paid. So there's a huge shift, especially in the service industry, of like getting contract-based employments. Now, interestingly enough, even though it's growing in many places in the US and in Europe, even the people working for the gig economy who are like contract-based, they want to have employments and they're asking for benefits. So like it's happening in Uber, for example, in California. It's happening also in France, where I know the laborers is saying, hey, listen, still when you get paid, you need to pay us for vacation or medical expenses. So we need to find a system. So it's a very, I think the labor market, I don't think has ever shifted as much as in the last 2 or 3 years. I think, for all the people going on the market right now, that the market since COVID, I think COVID just has been an accelerator in terms of changing organization, and it's a huge shift for everybody. To go back to the question that was earlier that you asked about I forgot my words here. I'm sorry, you're on mute now.
Common mistakes that people make.
Common mistakes. So common mistakes, yeah. To add to what David was saying, I think it's sometimes knowing what you are worth and really understanding what you need, and don't inflate basically your salary, or don't put yourself out of a a negotiation by asking a salary that is so high that people are like, you're not serious about it. I mean, you need to make sure that what you say is your worth is something that's very, that you really understand what you are worth based on industry standards. And the second thing, even though I'm saying that, for the women who are listening to us here, one of the common mistakes that is made is like the research shows, and it's across the world, that women do not negotiate as well as men do. And it's an amazing, and you might look at it and it's just like, and they don't negotiate from the start. And so it's a compounded effect for the rest of their career. And that's the one thing I want you to think about. For all the women listening here, it's like, you need to negotiate your salary because it has a huge impact. So somebody's asking here what to consider to estimate one's worth. I mean, it's basically, you have to do an estimation, like how much do you need to live on, maybe pay your debts, pay your family, pay your debts, and really look at what the industry standards are. I mean, I have a TA right now this semester, and he was telling me, so at ASU and Thunderbird, they pay $12 an hour, but he heard some friends were getting paid $28 an hour. And I'm like, I really want to see that, because, sometimes people also say, well, I'm being paid all that money for my business. I don't know if you have public records. I mean, I don't know if it's set up, but find a way to get to talk to people about, what was their experience, basically.
And if I can follow up and ask, in the US, you can research and find out what industry standards are. You can research what are some benchmarks for salaries. David, on continent, how do you are there sources that people can go to? What do you recommend for people trying to find that information?
Yeah, that's it's tough. So you have a lot of information out there online, but it's a lot of the reliable information is on international companies. So if you are interviewing with international companies, then that's great. You have a wealth of resources. There's Glassdoor, there's PayScale, and all of that you can rely on. When you are, if you fall into the majority who most likely are interviewing with local companies or regional companies, you may have information online, but it may not really be reliable. I know that there's a salary survey conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and this is conducted quite frequently. They try to do it almost every 3 to 4 years. There's one that is done for East Africa and Southern Africa. West Africa, I'm not I don't think that there is any recent estimates. And so that information is online. They profile quite a number of different sectors or industries, and they sort of try to benchmark and give estimated ranges for different functions. It's probably as good as it may get when it comes to online. So I'd encourage you to check that out, PwC, particularly if you're in Eastern Africa or Southern Africa. It is quite reliable. But for the vast majority, what I'd recommend really is that it really starts with research and networking within the company or the industry, right? You may, because online information is sort of quite depth, you need to build those personal connections, those relational connections. If you don't know anyone at your prospective employer, we need to take a bit of a broader outlook and look at the sector, look at the industry, right? And see if you have friends in the industry, for instance, if it's oil and gas, or if it's education, or if it's engineering. You may have friends in similar roles in comparable institutions that you may be able to sort of mine this data from. And it needs to be very strategic, because you don't want to price yourself out of the market, right? So you first need to make sure you do that sector dive or that industry dive, right? By looking at a specific industry, like I've mentioned, and then you do a function dive where you look at is it a sales and marketing role? Is it a product development role, a project management role, or a finance role, right? So there are two main levels that you have to, and this, you are going to have to, unfortunately, do a lot of networking. So this is where all your networking pays off. If you've done sufficient networking, you've developed the relevant contacts, it would help, it would pay off. And the other option I'd also recommend is to leverage the resources that your college may provide. If some colleges or some graduates have come from colleges that have very elaborate resources when it comes to career development, they frequently stay in touch with the market. They make sure that they have a wide alumni base. And so you can leverage that connection. That is now the time to reach out and say, hey, by the way, I may not, you may be able to, it's easier to cold call an alum than someone who you have no idea about. So you have that initial connection. I'd really encourage you to use that. But all I'd say really is that you can use online resources. It may not be very reliable, but I'd encourage that human connection, right? And so way before you even get to that point of negotiating your salary, you need to be researching the company. You need to be networking, because all that effort will pay off when you get to that point.
If I can jump in, it seems like we have a couple of questions in the chat about when do you talk about salary? And there seemed to be, if you can both talk about this, there seemed like, how do you find out what the salary range is at the beginning of looking into a job, and when is the best time to start negotiating a salary? We'll go to Denis.
So a couple of things. I'm looking at the chat. First of all, Rahatu, what you say about it's amazing and interesting how women can negotiate for products in the market with vendors and sales personnel here in Africa, but when it comes to salaries, everything goes. Actually, this is what you're saying is very deep, because it shows you actually the way women make decisions in terms of money, because one is for the outside, for the family and taking care of the family, and the salary is a personal issue. And the research, and which is pretty amazing. Globally, the research shows that when women are put in a situation of asking, what are you worth and how much do you think we should pay you? It's a totally different, what they call locus of focus in research. It's like, it's an internal issue, and basically the women have a hard time articulating really what they are worth. The research also shows you guys, for all the men who are listening, that men overestimate their value on the market. I mean, it's just like, I'm just saying here, so they would say, I'm worth, $100,000, where basically their performance is only worth 50,000, half of it, but that's another conversation. The interesting question you guys are asking here about when to negotiate. So to me, the way I'm trying to remind students, there's two parts of the negotiation. One is you need to get that job offer. Until you get that job offer, you are negotiating with them so that they look at you as an amazing potential employees. So I always tell my students, don't talk about salaries when you start in the process, because you want them to look at you and it's like, I want to hire David. David has the skills, he has the finance background, he seems to be a team player. He has everything we need here to hire him. Then when you get that job offer, when people say, hey, listen, we really want you to join the team, this is when you can talk about the salary. But I would not start the conversation by saying, I want a job that is remote 2 days a week. I want, this, you're never going to be hired. So it's really, they need to hire you first, and then you can start about the salary. And it requires you to have done your research up front, so that when they put a number on the table, put a number on the table, that you are able to negotiate with them. Also, the one thing is to make sure that you give people a range when you say, if somebody says, okay, how much are you worth it? You need to give them a range, knowing that the psychology is that they will go toward the lowest number. But as human beings, I mean, think about when you negotiate at markets, people will always go to the middle number. So just think about, like, give them a range so that you can negotiate in an easier way. So I don't know what, turn that to David again.
No, I think Dennis, it's fantastic points. Yeah, it's super. It's always best to let your employer bring up the topic of salary. You don't want to do that because you need to establish hireability first. Yeah, and it's super important. And I think the other points about ranges is also spot on. Yeah. There are instances though where sometimes right from the start, right? This happens with many African companies, and I've interviewed with both companies from the West and from Africa, right? And I know I tend to see that many Western companies tend to defer the conversation on salary till the end, until the offer is made, right? But for many sub-Saharan African countries, they want to sort of make sure that they don't, in quotes, waste their time by sort of beginning a process with someone who is completely out of their range. So they may actually surprise you and right at the very first interview ask you what are your salary expectations, right? So there are ways to go around that. It will be best to say that, well, maybe you want to defer that until you establish overall fit, right? So you feel that let's go through the process. Once that is complete, then we may talk about that. That we may have that discussion. That may go down well with some. Others may still push back, right? And so if they push back, then that's where I think the research we've talked about and what Dennis hinted on about ranges really comes into play. It's always good to give them a range, and don't be afraid to even go a little bit higher than you need, because they will always lowball. They will always lowball. Even they may actually go beneath your range, just to see, sometimes just to see how you react and how you negotiate. Right? It's a buying, selling, buying process, right? And they're selling your skills and they're buying. So don't be afraid, but always give a range and indicate that you are flexible. That I think should do it.
Very interesting. Are there any other special consideration for women? And I'll just say, in the United States, it's illegal. There are certain questions that are illegal for an employer to ask you. He cannot ask you if you are married. He cannot ask you if you have children, and he or she cannot ask you if you intend to have children. Those are strictly illegal. But I know that's not the case in some other countries. So do you have are there any other special considerations for women? Who wants to jump in?
I will take this one, and then I mean, that if you so again, I'm going to talk from the academic research that's being done and what I see going on with my students that I have here. So again, there's the research is actually pretty amazing. It's very clear that women I think it's only 1/3 of women are willing to negotiate their salary. So like are not willing, but also are engaging in the process of negotiating their salary. A third is a very low number, where I think for men, it's like 90% of the men will take a salary and look at it and it's like, no, I need more money, and here's why. So there's really that big disconnect in terms of gender. A lot of psychologists have talked about the issue of like how women are being brought up compared to men. I mean, there is a lot of psychology behind it. The bottom line is the women have to negotiate their salary, because again, I really remind my students that it's a compounding effect on the future earning. So for example, you make maybe $5,000 or $2,000 or whatever the currency is. You make, I mean, in the US, it still shows that women make 78 cents on the dollar. I mean, you know, and that number has shifted a little bit depending on industries, but it is not an equal salary system. I mean, the only parts of the world where it's a one-to-one is in Northern European countries. So if you go, you know, if you have a chance to work for a Northern European country, like from Denmark on, it doesn't matter. They look at the job and not at your gender. So everything is genderless. So basically, a maternity leave is equally for men and women. I mean, there's a lot of things, but it's an exception in the world. And I think it requires, unfortunately, all the research shows that women are not evaluated the same way. So you need to be over prepared, having your case, and if people are interested, there's a couple of interesting research projects on that. But this is really it's really very important. Do not take the first offer, basically, even though you feel pressure. And the one thing I'm just adding to women and negotiation. I see a lot of questions here about first salaries on the chat room here. You have to think about when you start in a business, regarding if you're a man or woman, it's your first job. And it's easier to get another job when you're already working because you make business connections. So, you know, I think people have to, you have to start thinking about that part here. And Sarah, you're absolutely correct. Minority women even make less than 78 cents to the dollar. I don't get it, but that's made a personal statement here. But so David, if you want to add to that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Yeah, that's a reality that we can't run away from. Unfortunately, I think one of the big mistakes actually that it's quite common is many people actually underestimate the impact of gender and things like intersectionality and negotiations, right? But what I say in the a way to there is a way around. And personally, I've started on conducted interviews where it was an all-male panel, and you had a lady come in, sometimes very qualified, but I'd say the very first thing I'd say is please stop apologizing, right? Stop apologizing. It's stop using terminology like I'm so sorry to bother you, or I know budgets are tight, or I feel bad about asking this. Please, it's that kind of language steals from your accomplishments and makes your negotiation personal, right? It's you are not asking for a personal favor, right? You want to make sure that at the end of the interaction you establish your value. So try not to take on that defeatist attitude, right? Try hard to make sure you link all the conversations to your value. Now, someone asked in the chat box, how do you establish or estimate your value in terms of, well, you may be able to look at your needs and then quantify that, but in terms of the approach, I'd say that make sure that you highlight achievements, right? Achievements and impacts that you've created in your former job or even in school or anything like that. It always sort of steers the conversation away from that personal, you know. It helps the employer, even if they may have, even if they are quite they are sort of prejudiced against you simply because you're a woman. If you tie the conversation to your achievements, right, it makes it difficult for them to bring that back up, right? So just always tell them about what you've accomplished. If you can put a dollar value or currency value to that, it's always great. Say that, well, I did A, B, C, D, and I just saved my company X thousands of dollars or euros or whatever it is, and I'm confident that I can do the same for you, right? and then also try and talk about how your skills can benefit the organization. That means that you must have done your research very well. So for you to always tell people that, make sure you go into the interview knowing some of a couple of the problems that the business may be facing, or at least that you observe. Then you can tie your skill sets and the bouquet of benefits you are bringing to the company's need. And so by doing that, you are certainly shifting the conversation away from that. You are helping the employees to actually focus on your value, and they look less at your agenda. So it's a very tricky bit, but please stop apologizing. Steer the conversation towards your achievements and the kind of the impact that you can bring to the company. Very, very important to anchor whatever offer to your value.
Thank you, David. So helpful. If I could ask, I've read some, I don't remember where, maybe Denis can shed light on this, that when you go into a negotiation, it's better to try it because you'll get something. That's what I've read. And if you don't try it, you're not going to get anything. But people who at least go in asking for something, they get something. It's better than nothing.
Absolutely. And because you have to remember, the job of an HR, whoever you're talking to, is to get you as cheap as possible. I mean, that's kind of their function. They want to get the best employee at the cheapest level. So if you don't ask for anything, they're not going to say, oh, do you know also that we're offering, this and this, that. No, their job is like, you're not asking the right question, and therefore, why should I put that on the table? That's why, and David said something very important here, is you need to know also what the pain points is for the organization, so you can turn the conversation over like, hey, this is what I can bring to your organization. I know you have challenges on XYZ. It requires you to really understand basically also what the company is struggling with, because you have to turn the conversation, but ask. I mean, the one thing they could say is no, but they always remember that their job is to get you as cheap as possible. And it doesn't matter if it's on the continent in Europe or Asia or in the US, that's basically the way the industry is structured. So just ask, and you might get something.
Very, very true. We're seeing another trend emerging in the chat, and it's another one of our topics, is what do you think are key success factors in salary negotiation? Who would like to start with that?
Mm-hmm. So I think I may take a couple. I think no need to talk. We've been talking a lot about value, so I think that's something that it's a given. You need to make sure you can establish in the mind of the employer how you can contribute to the organization, right? The other thing I'd say is there's no substitute for preparation, right? If you are well prepared, you be confident, you be self-assured, you be poised for success. I saw a chat, someone posted a chat in the a question in the chat box asking about a case where you've been offered a job as an intern first, and you've gone through, done an internship, and now you want a full-time position. How do you go about getting to know the salary that you may receive, right? So back to my original question about preparation, getting an internship in itself, right, is a great leg in the company, leg in the doorway, right? You need to make sure you maximize your time there, and that includes networking. Is not just networking outside the organization, but networking within the organization. So you need to make friends, you need to build advocates, you need to make sure you develop connections, and yes, you don't need to be crass and ask that, hey, how much are you being paid? But during your time there, you need to be quite strategic, so that you form friendships across different functions, across different levels within the organization, and you will get a sense, if that is on your mind, that I want to sort of get a sense of how much they are being paid, or the benefit structure, or something like that. If you go in with that, right, chances are very high that you will actually have that information. So preparation, seeing every opportunity to interact as an opportunity for you to get information, to mine information, particularly here in Africa, on the African continent, where information online is very scarce. We need to mine a lot of this information from human relations, from personal connections. Yeah, so that is one key success factor. And the other thing I'll say is that it's important to be very open-minded about how you negotiate, right? It's don't forget that your goals would be different from the goals of the employer, right? And so it's important to be flexible, and it's important to take a very wide view perspective on what we mean by salary, right? I said this earlier, that many times people think salary is just your basic, right? But there's so much more to that. There are health benefits, there are fringes, there's perks, there's flexible work hours. Some can get tuition reimbursement, even providence funds, pension plans, and all of those. If I know there are people who sometimes even negotiate parking space, but
Yeah.
it may be important to, and if you have dependents, if you have family, then clearly there are some priorities that you have with education and all of that. So have a holistic view of compensation, not just my salary. What's my basic? Is it $5,000 or is it $2,000? But if you realize that your employer is playing hardball and doesn't want to give in on maybe the basic, right? You may try to nudge him, push him on the benefit side, and see what else can I get? I mean, as health insurance is pretty basic, right? Sometimes you may be able to push them to add a couple of other dependents, if that works for you. How about flexible work hours, remote work? It gives you, sometimes buys you some time. It will save you on transport, as particularly if you have to commute for long hours and spend a lot of money. If you can get the benefit of, or the privilege of working maybe two days from home, right? With maybe a company data plan, or internet plan, that really works out. It may actually save you. So it's not always how much can I earn, it's also how much can I save, how much can my employer save me, right? So take that 360, that holistic idea, holistic perspective with compensation, and it will most likely help you come out on top.
So helpful. So I'm hearing like two main points. One, the negotiation starts much earlier with networking, doing your research, meeting people, finding, right? It doesn't start when you go to the negotiation. It starts actually much earlier as you're gathering your information. And in terms of what you're negotiating for, it's much broader than just the salary. There are other factors. Super helpful. Denny, what would you like to share on key success factors?
Well, no, I just think that David highlighted something very important, which is you need to be prepared and you need to have made connections. So, you need to know how the company functions. That's why the internships are so important. I know there are a couple of questions about internship, because that's what David was saying. It gives you, when you do an internship, people will see your values. So if you are working under the supervisor of somebody and your salary is too low, because the HR department and the person you work with are two different, one person wants you for your value and what you can do for the organization, and the HR is like, we're trying to lower your salary. We're trying to get you as cheap as possible. I've seen cases where actually students go back to the person they work with in the summer during the internship and say, hey, love to work with you guys, but it's not really what I've been offered. It's too low. I don't know, maybe there's something going on. And I've seen HR coming back with offering more money because there were some pressure for the person saying, no, don't miss on that person here. Like even though they all play hardballs, it's like, no, we don't want that person because that person is so efficient. that they can work on a project in 2 weeks where other people, it takes them 2 months to work on. So there is a lot of things. That's why I remind students, an internship it's basically a long time, it's a lengthy interviews that you have with an organization. And also during an internship, you can realize, not that you have worked for them, you're like, I don't want to work for that company. I don't like their culture. I don't like the people. I don't like what I will be doing, but it's a two-way street. So the internship is critical. And to me, it's being prepared, being absolutely prepared. And I think looking for a job is a job on itself. So that's why it's so exhausting. And you don't take rejection. Don't be demoralized about rejection. I know it happens at all levels, but just don't take rejection and saying, oh my God, I have nothing, because just maybe think about how you talk to people and be able to reframe. But what works is like being prepared, your network, and know your worth, know your value.
So what I hear you saying too is people may have some advocates within the company that they may not be aware of. And these people may be doing things behind the scenes to help advocate for, yes, they deserve that salary promotion.
Absolutely. And Maggie is asking actually a very good question here right now. If she says like, how much are you currently earning? To me, that's such a tricky question, because they look at it, it's like, so how much are you earning right now? Oh, okay. So we can basically transfer what you are earning to basically, we're going to pay you the same, but we have a nicer environment and we're going to throw in a couple of things. That's part of the lowballing people, just like, because the reason why you want to switch job is not to make the same amount of money. So unfortunately, I would just lie on that one. I will try to find a way to overestimate. That's what I would do, because it's none of their business. But even though in Germany, for example, you will have to have a letter for a former employer that has how much money you were making before. It's a very interesting thing. When you apply for a job, you need to have a letter from your former employer that says that person was paid that much money. It's again, it's culturally like totally different. So so that's Maggie, it's a very good question, but this one, you need to switch the conversation to your value and say, okay, this is what I can do for you guys. So that's a good, Maggie, that's a very good question.
Very good. Any other questions from the group, or any other comments from Denis or David that you'd like to share? We've looked at
So just a quick comment on Maggie's question. Very tricky question, and it's most people lie, but the thing is, some may. I've had some cases where some actually ask you for like salary advice from your former company after you've been hired, right, to verify, or at the salary negotiation phase. Don't underestimate. Some employers are ruthless, and they'll some actually go all the way. So it may come back to bite you. It's a very difficult question, but what I'd say, what I've done and I've seen people do, right, and this, what I saw people do actually were people's advice, really, was that particularly if you are stepping up to a higher role, right, you say, well, this was what I was getting, but there I was maybe not managing the team. I was responsible for just this and that and this, right? But over in this role, I expect to be able to do this. And so you need to, it's a curveball that will throw, but you need to be able to really turn it to your advantage. Make sure you understand the role and say, well, my former role is quite different from this role. And you may want to highlight some of those differences, that, there's no budget responsibility, there's no whatever. And if it's a case where there isn't too much of a difference, right? Too much of a difference, you may want to speak to trends there if they're available, and say, well, I know that I've spent some time in the space, and I know that the market rate is this, and so I don't believe asking for this amount is too much, right? But you always need to qualify. Just bottom line, just don't give a one-word answer. That how much were you earning? Oh, 80,000 a year. That is, it leaves too much room for misinterpretation. Yeah, you want to, even if you give that answer, you need to make sure you qualify that this is what, yeah, I was responsible for, but I expect more for this kind of role.
Excellent. We have a couple questions in chat that are interesting about if you volunteer for a company and how do you leverage your volunteering experience. And I think you could also look at unpaid internships. You know, how do you leverage an unpaid internship when you're negotiating your salary? Any comments on that?
If I can take one part of the answer, like for the unpaid internship. So, and I think to add to what David was saying, because I think he made a very good point. It's like when we negotiate salaries, always remember that when you enter that negotiation, you're always negotiating two things. You're negotiating the tangible, which is how much money. And if you only negotiate on the tangible, it becomes a game of haggling at the market, basically. You know, you're haggling for overall numbers, but also you're negotiating for intangibles, and that's your value in an organization. And that's the part that has indirect amount of money. So that's what you have to be able to articulate. Now, when it comes to volunteer, I mean, I think it's a cultural part, because like 2 years to volunteer for an organization. I don't know if it's volunteering part-time, but I think that's a tricky one. Like the sending an allowance and then giving an allowance, not a salary. That I don't know how to answer. Like I know in unpaid internship, usually the idea is to turn it into a salary for most people in the US or in Europe, but then they're not as common for Thunderbird. Most people get some kind of a stipend. I'm sorry, you guys, I don't know how to answer that question about volunteering and getting paid. So
yeah, myself, I'm not sure if the person is asking for money while so
I think if I don't know. Marion's a journalist, and so she may be volunteer, so it may be related to her field because she's right. So I think it may be specific to the field where she's volunteering as a journalist or a TV announcer, or I think so. And Marion, I think it's the same thing of knowing your worth, of what are the skills that you've been bringing and taking that to leverage your role and your salary.
Yes, and also not forgetting that holistic view as well. You may not get a company sometimes to budge on the salary because sometimes there's a rigid pay scale, but they may be willing to add some benefits. So if you tell them, if once you get to the point where you are sure they want you, you've established that you're a great hire, you can tell them that, well, these benefits would work for me. If you want to keep me at this scale, then can we adjust on this side as well?
I mean, kind of related to what Denise said before, Marion, you may be undervaluing yourself. Marion, I know you're awesome. If you're volunteering for free, something's wrong because you're just awesome. So that whole thing about knowing your worth and really, really believing that and trusting that and knowing that. I think our time is just about over. I have 12:30, Angela. If am I right? I think our time is just about it. Any final questions or final comments from our panelists? I want to thank you so much for coming today. This has been so helpful. I do want to, I'm going to say a lot of people talked about networking. I'm going to be posting on the Baobab chat forum guidelines on how to network in the early stages. And and some real good formulas for how you ask for a favor, what's the sequencing of what you do. I think you'll find it very helpful. But any final comments from our panelists?
Yeah, so just very briefly, what I'd say is that from the moment you make initial contact with any company or organization you wish to work with, you are in negotiation. Right? You may not be discussing money openly, but you are leaving a permanent imprint on the minds of the employer. So you need to be aware that negotiation is evaluative. Even the way you write emails, the way you respond to pressure, the way whether you send follow-on thank you notes, right? And if you keep your cool during salary negotiations, all of that comes to bear on that point when you're asking for money. So we should be very, 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 very careful. It's all part of the preparation. Networking, yes, but then your comportment during the entire negotiation process can actually even help you command a certain respect and aura. And if you can do that and apply all the some of the tips we've talked about, be cognizant of gender biases and differences, taking a holistic view of the entire package, and doing enough research, you should be fine. Yeah.
Good. The last thing I would like to remind people, and actually Cliff in the chat room is talking about it, is always remember that you are a much better negotiator when you have multiple offers or when you're talking to multiple people. So, I hope you think about the fact that you need to be able to go on multiple job interviews, and so you can train. It's a very weird process to talk about what your worth is. So I would, just go and practice doing it. Keep your resume, updated, and just do that all the time, because you will get better and better at knowing what your worth is. So, remember, try to have a couple of interviews, 2 or 3 interviews, because you will practice and you will become much, much better negotiator and much better interviewers. So.
All right.
Thank
you both so much. We're going to go on to the Baobab chat forum. Angela has posted the link. We're going to go there to continue the discussion. And once again, thank you so much, Denny and David. This has been such a helpful discussion. All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye, everyone. And thank you, everyone,
Bye-bye.
for joining us today.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Beyond the skies, you and I, we're breaking bounds on Baobab.